Just like in the other three stories that we looked at last week, the outcome of this one's starting from the beginning. There's no way that the Swede is coming out of this story alive. But it makes a real big difference where he gets killed. And it says early in the story, I'm going to be killed in this place. What kind of story would it be if he actually does get killed in that place? If he actually gets killed in that place, he had a premonition about it. Who would write about premonitions? We already read one story about him. The Romantics. It would be a romantic story. He predicted that he was going to get killed. Even though he brings it about himself, the Romantics would still see it as fate and as the whole thing, that the world was planned out and that he had a glimpse of where that plan was going. And so it was precognition. So it's very important that he doesn't get killed in the Blue Hotel. But he's doomed to get killed. And he's doomed to get killed by a whole lot of things that he hasn't got any clue about, just like the characters in the other stories. First of all, where does he come from? Blue Hotel, blonde-haired guy. None of his Randy bells.
Sweden?
No, they call him a Swede because they called everybody who was blonde a Swede. He comes from New York. I'm sorry.
That was in New York.
He comes from New York City. What did he do there? His job's important because it helps to explain a lot of his behavior. Well, let's go back to that matter of gender again. Just like to build a fire. Would this story have happened if a woman was the protagonist? No. First of all, in the 19th century, she wouldn't have been traveling alone anyway. Secondly, she would have been treated a lot differently. And third, she wouldn't have gone out west with the motivation he went out west with. Why is he so terrified? A Scully and the Easterner and Johnny and the cowboy, a bunch of cutthroats? No, they're just ordinary people for their place. Well, why does he think they're cutthroats?
Because of the perception at the time of what the area he was going into was like.
So everybody thought the West was like. You notice that even the Easterner says he's been reading those dime novels, which were all about killing and bloodshed. They were called dime novels because they cost a dime. They were cheap paperbacks. They were all about violence. Almost all of them were about the Wild West. And that's what he reads, and he thinks he's going out there. And as you said, it's what everybody thought the West was, because when the Easterner says he thinks he's out in the middle of all that killing and stabbing, the cowboy or Johnny says, well, why doesn't he wait till he gets out west where that stuff really happens? And the Easterner says, well, it's not like that even there now. Every place is turning into the East, little by little. There is no place where that kind of gunfighting and stuff is going on. But reality doesn't matter. What matters is what you believe. He's read these dime novels. Now the naturalists would say there's one place where Marx fits in. Why does he read cheap novels? Is he wealthy? No, he's worked as a tailor. He probably hasn't made all that much money. In fact, he's probably saved up with great difficulty enough for him to go west. So economics dooms him to read the kind of novels that he reads, which gives him this false impression about the place that he's going to. Why, as a guy, does he go? Now, he reads all about this place where there's a lot of shooting going on, and it's where men are men and women are women, and why does he go out there? Why did the guy to build a fire go out into the snow? To prove that he was a man. He goes out there. Remember when he thinks they're, right off the bat, he thinks they're going to kill him. Then he says, you think I'm a tenderfoot? Do you think I can't fight? Do you think I don't know what's going on? He's gone out there to prove himself to himself, which is pretty much the same as going out there to get himself killed. Would he do that if he was a woman? No, women don't have to prove themselves in the 19th century. In fact, if they prove themselves the way he proves himself, the 19th century wouldn't like them anyway. What does the fact that he's a tailor have to do with him going out west to prove himself? Is it a manly job? No. It's 19th century. It's sewing. Who did the sewing in the 19th century? Women. It was a kind of a feminine job. So he because the 19th century says you got to be a manly man. You have to have a manly job. It should be dangerous. There should be a lot of heavy lifting in it. And there's no danger and there's no heavy lifting in his. New York City at the time was fairly dangerous in itself. There were marauding gangs just like there are now. But it doesn't matter because that's not what he reads about. That's not where he gets those images of the hero, Bat Masterson shooting all of these outlaws and desperados. That's what he wants to be. And the fact that he feels bad about himself because he's a tailor, because the 19th century, is this a personal thing? Was he the only guy who thought that he had to be a manly man in the 19th century? No, they all did. They were all trapped in that. It didn't matter what their personalities were. That's what their times felt. That's what their culture said they ought to be. And so they were trapped into believing that myth about men, and then act in terms of it. They didn't even know it was there. The Swede has no idea that he's out there because of the kind of cheap, trashy novels that he reads. What about the fact that he's from the East? Well, there's another character from the East called the Easterner. Notice again we have the representative types, only this guy represents a whole region of people. Are Easterners any different than Westerners? Yeah, there's a big difference in regionalism in the country then. I mean, now you can go almost anywhere in the world and find a McDonald's, so our culture is seeped into every place. And there's a kind of uniformity to American culture now that there wasn't, despite the fact that we have more noticeable subcultures than they did in the 19th century. We're still a less diverse place because most of our culture comes off television, and it comes out of the goods and services that are provided for everybody. So everybody goes to McDonald's, or mostly everybody. And that's already determined for us, and that's what makes us kind of homogeneous. I mean, if you went out and took a picture of a divided highway, or a six-lane highway, just from that picture, you wouldn't be able to tell whether it was California or Atlanta or Boston. America even looks the same in most places. But when this story is written, there are big regional differences. And in fact, he starts out the whole story talking about how Scully did this magnificent thing by painting the hotel blue, which stuck out against that wintry, bleak landscape like a heron's legs. And how the people that come by in the trains on their way through from the east, the people who know the different shades of green and the change of seasons, do they react to it the same way that the local people around Fort Romper react to the building? No, he says some are horrified by it. Who would paint a building like that? Some of them are amused by it. Oh, these crazy Midwesterners. Must have been the only paint they could get hold of. Some of them like it, but most don't. But it's not a miraculous thing to them. But to the people who live around Fort Romper, this is a major achievement to have made a building that stands out like that. Because nothing much stands out of that landscape. And the Midwest, even now, has the image of being very bland and uniform and conservative, and nothing ever really changes. It's like a Californian moving into the Midwest. Scully did this thing. If you went to the Southwest and painted a building blue, probably nobody would notice very much. They'd notice a lot in New England, but they'd all be horrified by it. They would, in fact, be banding together to make them change and paint it white like everybody else's buildings. But out there, the people see this as a marvel. The Midwest, turn of the century, is it confident about itself on the whole? Does it see itself as an equal to the East? No, the East is much more developed. The East is much more sophisticated. Some of these places were territories within people's living memory. So they're kind of defensive about being a civilized place. That's why they're so upset that the Swede thinks that he's in some kind of barbarian country where he could get killed at any moment. It's also why they can't understand him. To him, it seems like a perfectly ordinary place. What does Scully try to tell him when Scully's trying to convince him that he's not out in the Wild West? And he takes him upstairs. He goes upstairs after him when the Swede first starts to leave. What does he tell him to prove to him that this is a civilized place? We're going to have electric lights. We're building a brick factory. And he tries to convince him that he's just an ordinary person. This is a picture of my little daughter that died. This is a picture of my son, the lawyer, in Kansas City, well-respected gentleman. Why, by the way, you notice that some of the time Scully speaks with an Irish brogue. What's that supposed to indicate? Mr. Dunphy?
He was probably, he might have, he was a first generation from Ireland, and he speaks with it occasionally. He's trying to cover it up.
Most of the time he tries not to use it. You notice that the angrier he gets, the thicker the brogue becomes, so that when he and the cowboy are talking about how much they wanted to beat up the Swede, you can hardly even understand him. He's supposed to seem more primitive than the sophisticated Easterner who applies his intellect to everything that goes on. What was the status of the Irish in the 19th century in America? There were signs up, Irish need not apply. They were seen as more primitive. And so that's one of the reasons why Crane makes him an Irishman, why he gives him that brogue. He's first generation immigrant. He's not completely absorbed in America yet. And of course he's supposed to have that passionate nature. Crane's readers would not have found it unlikely that Scully would have encouraged the fight finally. Although you don't have to be Irish to encourage the fight. Who else wants to see that fight go on? The cowboy. What's the cowboy do during the fight? He's yelling, "Kill him, kill him." So even though we don't get his nationality at all, it doesn't matter. Well, the fact that he's a cowboy, what's that supposed to tell us? College educated? No. That was one of the lowest jobs there were. You didn't even go for that job unless you had no prospects of getting another one. It doesn't require all that much. You have to deal with dumb animals and get them to go in the same direction. And basically you do that by yelling at them and kicking them. Doesn't take a lot. Is he all that? Does he seem to be all that bright? No, he's always talking out of a mist of bewilderment. He can't figure out what's going on most of the time. Even when the Easterner, how about the Easterner? More or less sophisticated than the others. More sophisticated. You notice he doesn't want the fight to go on. It's only a game. Wait a moment. Tries to get them to stop. Johnny was cheating. You find that out at the end of the story. How come the Easterner didn't say so?
He said he didn't want to fight. He was saving it up to the cowboy. He said he didn't want to fight.
Who did? The Easterner?
Didn't want to fight.
Easterner doesn't want the fight to go on, and he doesn't want to fight himself. I mean, if the Swede says Johnny's cheating, and you say, yes, Johnny was cheating, what's Johnny going to do?
Challenge him.
He's going to challenge him. And in fact, it's much more likely that he'll fight with the Easterner. Is Johnny a heroic figure? No, he's pretty much of a bully. He's been cheating right from the beginning. Crane doesn't tell us, but you notice he's playing cards with that old man. And the old man is disgusted with him and angry with him. Finally, he throws down the cards and storms out. And we have no idea why until we get further into the story and realize Johnny cheats all along. And it's a game of cards, it's just for fun. Well, why is Johnny cheating? Why does he cheat everybody that he plays? Look at what Johnny's like. How old is he? He's not very old. He's in his teens, late teens at the most. How does Scully treat Johnny? Like an equal?
He's always top starter.
First thing he does is blame him. What did you do to the man? Johnny keeps telling him I didn't do anything to him. Does Scully accept that? No, he's sure it's got to be Johnny. It's always Johnny. He doesn't do it in the story, but you get the feeling he's been beating Johnny pretty regularly. So you're a kid. Your old man beats you up. You get blamed for everything. All the adults are in charge. You got no power. You got no respect. So how do you get even? You cheat them at cards. You outsmart them. Johnny's been bullied, so he's kind of a bully himself. He thinks he can beat the Swede anyway, even though the Swede's a lot bigger than him, because he is from the East, obviously. And any manly man from the West would have thought that he was more of a man than a man from the East, especially a tailor from the East. So Johnny thinks he can win that fight, but if the Easterner speaks up, he's sure he can beat the Easterner. The Easterner's not only from the East and sophisticated and doesn't like to fight, he's little. So Johnny would definitely beat him up. And to save himself, the Easterner doesn't say anything. Does that make him a noble character? No, you notice it's not like realism. I mean, in real life, you're a little guy who's likely to get your butt kicked if you open your mouth. What will you probably do? Keep your mouth shut. But it isn't about the internal struggle within the Easterner to try to make the decision to talk or not. We don't even know that he had that struggle until we get to the very end of the story, when he says he didn't stand up and say it. The focus is on how the Swede is going to get ground up by these large-scale social forces, which of course he does. He gets him killed. Everybody in the story is pretty primitive. Even the Easterner is the victim of natural drives. Anger isn't part of his makeup, but fear is. Fear motivates him. Higher principles don't motivate the Easterner. He doesn't keep quiet about Johnny's cheating because Johnny's a friend and you don't betray a friend. It's not romanticism. It's not the signal man. He does it just out of pure fear, and it's not until much later that he even accepts that in himself. We get descriptions of nature in the Blue Hotel, which is one of those places where nature is being used as a symbol for these enormous forces that you really can't stand up against, and that just crush everybody. When they go out to fight, that's when we get most of the descriptions of the snow. Although before that, every time the door opens, the chill comes in. We have a blizzard that's more or less stranding them there. Nobody really can move when nature decides to exert its forces. And when they go outside, there's a heavy emphasis on the weather. No snow was falling, but great whirls and clouds of flakes swept up from the ground by frantic winds, were streaming southward with the speed of bullets. The covered land was blue with the sheen of an unearthly satin, and there was no other hue save where, at the low black railway station, which seemed incredibly distant, one light gleamed like a tiny jewel. As the men floundered in thigh-high deep drift, it was known that the Swede was bawling out something. And the Swede says they're all going to jump on him. But again, you have this enormous force of the storm around them. The cold, just like the cold in To Build a Fire. The cowboy was formulating new and unspellable blasphemies. The Easterner was startled to find that they were out in a wind that seemed to come direct from the shadowed Arctic floes. He heard again the wail of the snow as it was flung to its grave in the south. He knew now that all this time the cold had been sinking into him, deeper and deeper, and he wondered that he had not perished. He felt indifferent to the condition of the vanquished man. He knows Johnny, but he doesn't even care about him anymore. He's become emotionally numb. The cold has seeped into him, the fear has seeped into him and changed him. And then probably one of the best naturalistic descriptions of humanity. We picture the world as thick with conquering and elate humanity. But here, with the bugles of the tempest pealing, it was hard to imagine a peopled earth. One viewed the existence of man then as a marvel, and conceded a glamour of wonder to these lice, which were caused to cling to a whirling, fire-smitten, ice-locked, disease-stricken, space-lost bulb. The conceit of man was explained by this storm to be the very engine of life. One was a coxcomb, not the dye in it. However, the Swedes soon found a saloon. In front of it was an indomitable red light was burning, and the snowflakes were made blood color as they flew through the circumscribed territory of the lamp shining. We don't get a more pessimistic view of Earth than a whirling, fire-smitten, ice-locked, disease-stricken, space-lost ball. If there's anything remarkable about mankind, naturalist says it's that he doesn't just curl up and die, with any sense would do. You notice again, the red light is what leads him to the bar. So snow he can't see very well. Is it fate that's taken him there? No, it's those enormous forces. If he hadn't gotten himself in trouble at the Blue Hotel, if he had lost the fight, they would have let him stay. The fact that he beat up Johnny and and then how does he react after he wins? A lot of good sportsmanship and noble attitudes? No, he gloats over it. And he mocks the cowboy over it, screaming, kill him, and mimics him. And he goes to the saloon and almost gets in a fight with the bartender. Oh, that's another thing. What's reduced the Swede? Even now that his fear is gone, the Swede is still a very primitive character. What reduced him to that level? How did he go from being a frightened guy to being an arrogant, annoying guy? He got drunk. Scully, when he can't convince him, crawls under the bed and tries to find his liquor. What does that tell you about Scully? Admirable character? No, Scully likes to drink. And he's got a bottle all the time. Why does he hide it? He's afraid Johnny's going to get it. He's got it marked so that he can see whether any's been taken out of it or not. It's another way that Johnny gets back at adult authority. He steals his father's liquor. They get the Swede drunk, and now the Swede's brave, but it's a borrowed kind of bravery. And it's what makes him so arrogant. And he's still drunk. He's partly drunk on his victory, and he's partly drunk on the alcohol when he shows up at the saloon. How come he doesn't meet, say, a gunfighter there in the saloon? Well, one, they don't really exist anymore. If they did, it would kind of be a romantic story again, in that he goes off and has a premonition, he gets himself killed in the Wild West just the way he thought he was going to be. The guy who kills him, the gambler, what's he look like?
He's little.
Yeah, he's little, which is one of the reasons why. How about the Swede? He's a bully just like Johnny. That's why he picks him. Also, the gambler. He's not very impressive to look at. What's he like as a person? Now he's there playing cards with a district attorney and a banker. Is he part of the upper crust of the town? Well, he plays with them and they admire him, but they won't let him in the Pollywog Club. He's a gambler. He's a sort of almost criminal. But he's a gentleman. Everybody's very impressed with the way that he acts. When they blackball him from the Pollywog Club, he acts, well, you know, I can understand that. You're legitimate people and I'm not, and I would probably have done the same in your place. And so he takes it with such good grace that the people who wanted him in are that much more in favor of him. And even the people who blackball him are beginning to wonder if maybe they really should have let him in. He's a natural gentleman. You notice that he plays cards with the wealthier men in town. Do you think he loses often? No more than necessary. This is a smart guy. You don't live as a gambler unless you're pretty bright. It's not just your skill at cards. It's your ability to read people, to read situations. When he gets a farmer, Crane says, drunk on stupidity, who comes in with all the cash from his harvest, he takes him for everything he has. But he doesn't clean out everybody in town. He's got to be a better card player than these amateurs. He makes a living at it. So the odds are he could probably clean out everybody there if he wanted to. How come he doesn't? Go ahead. Mr. Dunphy.
Okay,
You're first.
He doesn't want to, be known as the guy that, that always wins because nobody's going to bet against him.
Yeah, nobody's going to play with him. He needs a base of operations. I'm sorry. You're going to say the same thing. He needs a place that gives him a sort of air of respectability. And one of the reasons he needs that, of course, is that when he does beat people at cards, otherwise they're going to think that he cheated and they're going to attack him. And you notice that, well, why do they put up with this gambler who beats them probably more often than he loses to them? They like being close to him because he's dangerous. He's a wolf. And he eats those farmers up, but these manly men get to play cards with him all the time, and he doesn't cheat them, he doesn't beat them. So it makes them feel brave and manly to be in this dangerous company. It's about as dangerous as things get out there. You notice he carries a knife instead of a gun. How come? What does that tell you about his character? Well, if you have a gun, you shoot people from further away. You might get angry and use that. To use a knife, you've got to get in close. You have to take some risks. This is not a cowardly guy. But it's also a guy who wouldn't use that weapon unless he's really pushed to the wall. I mean, the Swede, he doesn't... How about when the Swede is trying to make him drink, and even when he puts his hand on his shoulder? The gambler doesn't get mad. He tells him to run along and leave them alone. It's not until the Swede grabs him by the throat and his life is in danger that he takes out the knife and stabs him. So he's a guy who, it's a weapon that's only going to be used in self-defense. It's not something, if you were a robber, you wouldn't by preference take a knife. Even if you were a murderer, you wouldn't. This is something that you'd only use when you have no other choice. A gun you might be tempted to use at a distance. And of course, if you kill somebody, the Wild West is gone. You're not going to walk away from that. You're going to go to prison. You notice, even though this is self-defense, the gambler still goes to prison. How come? If the district attorney or the banker had picked that knife up off the table and stabbed the Swede, would they have gone to prison? No, it's because he's the gambler. Notice again, his life is determined by his economic situation, by his social situation, by his intelligence. The gambler is a guy who lives by his wits. Could he get a job as a cowboy? Probably not. The cowboys are pretty big and strong. It doesn't seem to be his character. It's already determined before anything even starts that the gambler will be what he's going to be before his life even begins. All of that's determined. Just like everything that's going to happen to the Swede is determined by what his biological gifts were. The fact that he's a big guy makes him want to have a more masculine job than he has. Makes him want to go out and prove himself as a man. The Easterner doesn't seem to feel compelled to prove himself manly or heroic. He's little and he accepts it. He's not going to be able to go around beating people up. The Swede ought to be able to. And the Swede needs to go out and prove himself. Well, that's partly determined by his biology. He doesn't have a lot of choice about that. Again, he's a victim. Everybody's a victim in this story. And Crane even sums it up as everybody being the victim. We are all in it. The poor gambler isn't even a noun. He's not even an object or a thing or a person that does an act. He's a kind of an adverb. An adverb is a word that modifies a verb. In other words, he modified an action that was already in progress. The Swede was on his way to get himself killed somewhere, and the gambler just happens to modify the circumstances that get him killed. Every sin is the result of a collaboration. We, 5 of us, have collaborated in the murder of this Swede. Usually there are from a dozen to 40 women really involved in every murder. But in this case it seems to be only 5 men. You, I, Johnny, old Scully, and that fool of an unfortunate gambler came merely as a culmination, the apex of a human movement, and gets all the punishment. Well, how did they all conspire to get the Swede killed? Cowboy encouraged the fight, Scully encouraged the fight, Johnny was cheating, the Easterner didn't say anything. In fact, actually, even this, he doesn't say it, but the Swede even collaborated in his own death. He went out there to push people's buttons. He went out there to get into a fight, even though once he gets there, he's terrified of what's going to happen to him. What does he mean by normally there are 40 women involved in every murder? Seems like a misogynistic statement. Why do guys want to be manly men? For women. So there's every woman in the Swede's life that turned him down because he wasn't he wasn't a manly man, is still in his head, is still motivating him. We don't know, but maybe the Swede got rejected so many times he had to go out west and prove to himself that he was a man. And of course there are mothers involved, and most of the teaching was done by women. The civilizing effects in the 19th century were generally attributed to women. Left to their own devices, men would have just pretty much killed one another without a hesitation. It's women that bring civilization, because they bring families, they bring children. You notice the gambler is married. Whenever somebody has a question about the gambler's integrity, the others bring up that he's got a wife and children and a little house in the suburbs. He's just like the rest of them, except that he's a gambler. He's just a little bit more dangerous than they are. And of course, all of those things lead to the destruction of the Swede. And there's no point in that story where the Swede isn't going to get killed. He comes out there to get killed. The fact that Scully has to capture him. Economic motivation even for Scully. Scully's got a hotel, but he's not John Jacob Astor. He's not really wealthy. He's got to keep getting customers for that hotel, and he goes out to the train to recruit them, and he captured 3 of them. This was a big coup for Scully. But it's economics that makes Scully do that. It's not that he likes people all that much. It's that he's forced to do it. So again, there's another force at work here that we can't even see, and the people who are the victims of the force haven't got any control over it and don't even suspect that it's there. Anybody have any questions or comments on rationalism? Okay, we're going to go on to